Chapter 1: The Canyon of Damnation. Hell Canyon is located in the remote borderlands between Arizona and New Mexico, approximately 50 miles from the nearest settlement. The canyon is a natural formation carved over millions of years by water and wind, creating towering red rock walls that seem to bleed in the afternoon sun. The canyon earned its name not from any official designation, but from the stories told by those who'd ventured into it. Stories of strange occurrences, stories of unexplained phenomena, stories of a place where the normal rules of nature seemed to be suspended. The first documented account of Hell Canyon dates back to 1871, when a cavalry unit led by Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington was pursuing Apache raiders through the Arizona Territory. The cavalry unit consisted of 40 soldiers, all well-armed and well-trained. They were following a trail of Apache warriors that led directly into Hell Canyon. According to the official military records, the cavalry unit entered the canyon on a clear afternoon. The sun was still high in the sky. The visibility was excellent. There was no indication of danger. But something was wrong. According to the account of a private named Samuel Cross, who was one of the few survivors of what happened next, the moment the cavalry unit entered the canyon, the atmosphere changed. The air became thick and heavy, as if it was pressing down on them with physical weight. The animals became restless. The horses refused to move forward. The mules began to bellow and strain against their harnesses. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington ordered his men to proceed. He believed the animals were simply nervous because of the unfamiliar terrain. He believed that the Apache warriors were close and that hesitation would allow them to escape. So the cavalry unit continued into the canyon. As the sun began to set, the canyon became increasingly dark. The towering red rock walls blocked out the light, creating shadows that seemed to move and shift with a life of their own. The soldiers began to feel watched, observed, judged by something that existed just beyond the edge of perception. And then, as darkness fell completely, they heard it. According to Private Cross's account, it started as a distant sound, a faint echo, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of hooves, galloping hooves, moving at an impossible speed. The soldiers tried to identify the source of the sound, but they couldn't. The sound seemed to surround them, to come from all directions simultaneously. And then, as the sound grew louder, the soldiers began to realize that something was terribly wrong. The hooves were not moving like normal horses. The hooves were moving with an unnatural rhythm. The hooves were moving with a speed and intensity that no living animal could achieve. And then they appeared. According to Private Cross's account, the horses emerged from the darkness like phantoms, but they were not normal horses. These were creatures that defied description. Their forms seemed to shift and waver in the darkness, as if they were not entirely present in the physical world. Their eyes glowed with an eerie, sickly light. And their hooves,
Their hooves seemed to be made of iron, striking the stone ground with a sound like thunder. The soldiers opened fire. They fired hundreds of rounds, their rifles blazing in the darkness, but the bullets passed through the creatures as if they were made of smoke and shadow. The horses were unharmed. The creatures attacked. They moved with a terrible grace and power, trampling soldiers beneath their hooves, striking them with their manes and tails, driving them into a panic. According to Private Cross's account, the slaughter lasted only minutes, but it seemed to go on forever. Soldiers screamed as they were trampled. Soldiers cried out as they were struck by the creatures. Soldiers fled in terror, trying to escape the nightmare that had descended upon them. By the time the creatures vanished back into the darkness, only a handful of soldiers remained alive. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington was dead, trampled beneath the hooves of the demonic horses. Over 30 soldiers had been killed. The rest were wounded, traumatized, broken. Private Cross and the other survivors managed to escape the canyon and make their way back to the nearest settlement. They reported what they'd seen, but their accounts were dismissed as the ravings of traumatized men. The military officially attributed the deaths to an Apache ambush, even though the evidence didn't support this explanation. But the story spread. Travelers began to speak of Hell Canyon. Merchants began to avoid the area. Settlers began to warn newcomers to stay away from the canyon, especially at night. And the incidents continued. In 1873, a group of miners was traveling through Hell Canyon on their way to a silver mine in New Mexico. The miners were experienced, tough men who didn't believe in supernatural phenomena. They believed only in hard work, practical solutions, and the power of dynamite and pickaxes. But Hell Canyon had other ideas. According to the account of a miner named Thomas Garrett, who was one of the few survivors, the miners heard the hooves around midnight. The sound started as a distant echo, but it grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. The miners tried to flee, but they found that they couldn't move. It was as if an invisible force was holding them in place, forcing them to listen to the sound of the approaching hooves. And then they appeared. According to the account of a miner named Thomas Garrett, the hooves emerged from the darkness, their forms glowing with an eerie light, and their hooves striking the stone ground with the sound like the beating of a demonic art. The miners tried to fight. They used their weapons, their tools, their bare hands, but nothing worked. The creatures were unstoppable. The creatures were invulnerable. By the time the creatures vanished back into the darkness, most of the miners were dead. Thomas Garrett and one other miner managed to escape, but they were forever changed by the experience. They spent the rest of their lives haunted by what they had witnessed in Hell Canyon.
Chapter 2. The investigation begins. By the 1880s, Hell Canyon had become legendary. The stories had spread throughout the frontier. Travelers spoke of the demonic horses. Merchants warned their competitors to avoid the canyon. Settlers told stories to their children about what happened to those who ventured into Hell Canyon at night. But no one knew what the creatures actually were. No one knew why they haunted the canyon. No one knew how to stop them. In 1885, a historian and paranormal researcher named Dr. Edward Blackwell decided to investigate the legend of Hell Canyon. Blackwell was a man of science, a man who believed that every mystery could be solved through careful investigation and logical analysis. He spent months traveling the frontier, interviewing survivors, collecting accounts, documenting the pattern of the incidents. What Dr. Blackwell discovered was shocking. According to Blackwell's research, the incidents in Hell Canyon followed a specific pattern. The creatures only appeared at night. The creatures only appeared when the moon was full or nearly full. The creatures only appeared to those who ventured into the canyon during these specific times. But there was something else, something that suggested the creatures were not random or mindless, something that suggested they were targeting specific types of people. According to Blackwell's analysis, the creatures seemed to target those who were involved in the exploitation of the land. Miners who were extracting resources from the earth, cavalry units who were pursuing Native Americans, settlers who were displacing indigenous peoples. In other words, the creatures seemed to be targeting those who were destroying the natural world and the indigenous cultures that inhabited it. Blackwell theorized that Hell Canyon was a place of ancient power, a place where the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual world had grown thin, a place where ancient spirits or forces had been awakened by the desecration of the land. But Blackwell also discovered something else. He discovered that there had been incidents in Hell Canyon long before the American frontier era. He discovered that Native American tribes had spoken of the canyon as a place to be avoided. He discovered that the canyon had a dark history that stretched back centuries. According to Blackwell's research, Native American tribes had performed rituals in Hell Canyon, rituals that were meant to bind malevolent spirits to the canyon, rituals that were meant to prevent those spirits from escaping and causing harm to the world outside. But something had gone wrong. Something had broken the seal. Something had awakened the spirits that had been bound to the canyon for centuries. Blackwell theorized that the arrival of American settlers and miners had disrupted the natural balance of the canyon. The extraction of resources from the earth, the destruction of the natural landscape, the desecration of sacred sites. All of this had weakened the seal that bound the spirits to the canyon. And the spirits were beginning to escape. The spirits were beginning to manifest in the physical world. The spirits were beginning to hunt. Blackwell documented his findings in a detailed journal. He theorized that the only way to stop the creatures would be to perform a counter-ritual, a ritual designed to rebind the spirits to the canyon, a ritual designed to restore the seal that had been broken. But Blackwell also realized something else. He realized that such a ritual would require a sacrifice of blood, a sacrifice of life, a sacrifice that would need to be made willingly by someone who understood the consequences. Blackwell decided to attempt the ritual himself. He decided to try to rebind the spirits to the canyon. He decided to try to stop the creatures from escaping and causing harm to the world outside. But before he could perform the ritual, something happened that would change everything.
Chapter 3. The Ritual Goes Wrong. On the night of the full moon in September of 1886, Dr. Edward Blackwell entered Hell Canyon with the intention of performing a counter-ritual. He brought with him ancient texts that he'd collected during his research. He brought with him offerings of blood and sacred herbs. He brought with him the knowledge and the determination to stop the creatures. According to Blackwell's journal, which was discovered after his death, he arrived at the ritual site around midnight. The moon was full and bright, casting long shadows across the canyon. The air was thick and heavy, as if it was pressing down on him with physical weight. Blackwell began to set up the ritual. He arranged the offerings in a circle. He drew symbols on the ground using chalk and blood. He prepared himself mentally and spiritually for what he was about to do. And then he began to chant. According to Blackwell's journal, he chanted the ancient words that he'd learned from the texts. He chanted the words that were meant to bind the spirits to the canyon. He chanted the words that were meant to restore the seal. But something was wrong. As Blackwell chanted, the ground beneath him began to shake, the rocks began to crack, the air began to shimmer and distort, as if reality itself was being torn apart. And then the creatures appeared. According to Blackwell's account, they emerged from the darkness like an army, dozens of them, hundreds of them, all with glowing eyes and iron hooves, all moving with a terrible grace and power. Blackwell tried to continue the ritual, but he found that he couldn't. The creatures were too powerful. The creatures were too close. The creatures were surrounding him, trapping him, preventing him from completing the ritual. The creatures attacked. According to Blackwell's final journal entry, which he managed to write while hiding in a cave, the creatures trampled him. They struck him with their hooves. They drove him into the ground with a terrible force. But something extraordinary happened, something that Blackwell couldn't explain. As the creatures attacked him, Blackwell felt something shift inside him. He felt something change. He felt himself beginning to transform. According to Blackwell's account, he felt his body beginning to fuse with the creatures. He felt his consciousness beginning to merge with their consciousness. He felt himself beginning to become something other than human. And then, in a moment of clarity, Blackwell realized what was happening. He realized that the ritual had worked, but not in the way he had intended. The ritual had not rebound the spirits to the canyon. The ritual had instead bound Blackwell to the creatures. Blackwell had become part of the herd. According to Blackwell's final journal entry, he wrote, "I am no longer human. I am no longer entirely myself. I am becoming one with the creatures. I am becoming one with the spirits. I am becoming one with Hell Canyon. But I understand now. I understand what must be done. I understand what the creatures want. And I understand that I am the key to stopping them." After that final entry, Blackwell's journal goes silent. The next morning, when search parties arrived at Hell Canyon, they found Blackwell's journal and his belongings, but they found no trace of Blackwell himself. It was as if he had simply vanished into the canyon. But the incidents in Hell Canyon changed after that night. The creatures continued to appear, but they appeared less frequently. The creatures continued to hunt, but they seemed less aggressive, less violent. It was as if something had changed, as if something had shifted in the balance of power. Some say that Blackwell's transformation had given him the ability to communicate with the creatures. Some say that Blackwell had negotiated a truce. Some say that Blackwell had convinced the creatures to stop hunting humans. Others say something different. Others say that Blackwell had become the leader of the herd.
Others say that Blackwell had joined the creatures and was now guiding them, directing them, controlling them. And still others say that Blackwell had discovered the true purpose of the creatures, that Blackwell had realized that the creatures were not evil or malevolent, that Blackwell had realized that the creatures were simply trying to protect the canyon, that Blackwell had realized that the creatures were trying to prevent further desecration of the land. Whatever the truth, the incidents in Hell Canyon became less frequent after Blackwell's disappearance. The creatures still appeared, but only occasionally. The creatures still hunted, but only those who were actively desecrating the canyon or exploiting its resources. It was as if the creatures had been given new instructions, as if the creatures had been given a new purpose, and Hell Canyon remained a place to be avoided, a place where the dead refused to rest, a place where ancient spirits still roamed, still hunted, still protected the sacred ground.
Chapter 4: The Modern Encounters. The incidents in Hell Canyon did not stop after Dr. Blackwell's disappearance. They simply changed in nature and frequency. In 1923, a group of oil prospectors was exploring Hell Canyon, looking for oil deposits. The prospectors were modern men, men who believed in science and technology, men who didn't believe in curses or supernatural phenomena. They were equipped with the latest drilling equipment and surveying instruments. But Hell Canyon had other ideas. According to the account of a prospector named William Hayes, the men heard the hooves around midnight. The sound started as a distant echo, but it grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. The prospectors tried to flee, but they found that their vehicles wouldn't start. It was as if an invisible force was preventing them from escaping. And then the creatures appeared. The demonic horses emerged from the darkness, their forms glowing with an eerie light, their hooves striking the stone ground with a sound like the beating of a demonic heart. But this time, something different happened. This time, the creatures didn't attack. This time, the creatures simply surrounded the prospectors and looked at them. The creatures seemed to be studying them, assessing them, judging them. According to Hayes's account, he felt a presence in his mind, a presence that was not his own, a presence that seemed to be communicating with him, speaking to him, telling him something. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the creatures vanished back into the darkness. The prospectors managed to escape Hell Canyon, but they were forever changed by the experience. They reported what they'd seen, but their accounts were dismissed as hallucinations brought on by fear and stress. However, Margaret Chen became obsessed with understanding what had happened in Hell Canyon. She spent years researching the legend. She spent years collecting accounts from survivors. She spent years trying to understand the nature of the creatures. And in 1978, Margaret Chen published a book titled The Iron Hooves, a study of paranormal phenomena in Hell Canyon. In her book, Chen theorized that the creatures were not evil or malevolent. Chen theorized that the creatures were guardians, guardians of the canyon, guardians of the land, guardians of the ancient spirits that had been bound to the canyon for centuries. Chen theorized that the creatures were becoming more selective in their attacks. Chen theorized that the creatures were learning to distinguish between those who meant harm and those who meant no harm. Chen theorized that the creatures were evolving, developing, becoming more intelligent and more purposeful. And Chen theorized that Dr. Edward Blackwell was still alive, that Blackwell was still in Hell Canyon, that Blackwell was still guiding the creatures, directing them, controlling them. Chen's book became controversial. Some believed her theories, others dismissed them as the ravings of a woman obsessed with folklore and superstition. But the evidence seemed to support Chen's theories. In 1987, a group of miners tried to enter Hell Canyon to extract uranium. The miners were equipped with modern equipment and modern weapons. They believed that they could overcome any obstacle, including supernatural phenomena. But Hell Canyon had other ideas. According to the account of a miner named Caldwell, the creatures appeared around midnight, but this time they didn't attack. This time, they simply surrounded the miners and forced them to leave the canyon. The creatures were selective. The creatures were purposeful. The creatures were protecting the canyon from those who would exploit it. In 2003, a paranormal investigation team led by Dr. Sarah Chen, Margaret Chen's daughter, decided to investigate Hell Canyon. The team was equipped with thermal imaging cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, audio recording devices, and more. Their goal was to document any paranormal activity and, if possible, to understand the nature of the creatures. What they found was extraordinary. According to Dr. Sarah Chen's report, the team recorded audio evidence of the creatures. They recorded the sound of hooves galloping at an impossible speed. They recorded the sound of voices speaking in an ancient language. They recorded the sound of something that seemed to be communicating, trying to convey a message. And they recorded something else. They recorded what appeared to be a human voice, speaking English, mixed in with the sound of the hooves, a voice that seemed to be guiding the creatures, a voice that seemed to be directing them. According to Dr. Sarah Chen's report, the voice sounded like it belonged to a man who had been transformed by the creatures, a man who was no longer entirely human, a man who had become something other than himself, a man who might have been Dr. Edward Blackwell.
Chapter 5. The Truth Revealed. After Dr. Sarah Chen's investigation in 2003, the mystery of Hell Canyon seemed to deepen rather than resolve. The evidence suggested that something extraordinary was happening in the canyon. The evidence suggested that the creatures were not mindless demons or spirits. The evidence suggested that they were intelligent, purposeful, and guided by a human consciousness. But who was guiding them? Was it really Dr. Edward Blackwell, transformed by the creatures over a century ago? Or was it someone else? In 2010, Dr. Sarah Chen published a paper titled The Guardians of Hell Canyon, a study of intelligent paranormal phenomena. In her paper, Chen proposed a radical new theory about the nature of the creatures.
Chen theorized that the creatures were not demons or evil spirits. Chen theorized that the creatures were guardians, guardians of the canyon, guardians of the land, guardians of the ancient spirits that had been bound to the canyon for centuries. Chen theorized that the creatures had been created by an ancient ritual performed by Native American tribes, a ritual designed to bind malevolent spirits to the canyon and prevent them from escaping. A ritual that had created the creatures as a defense mechanism. A ritual that had given the creatures the ability to protect the canyon from those who would desecrate it. And Chen theorized that Dr. Edward Blackwell had not been killed by the creatures. Chen theorized that Blackwell had been transformed by the creatures. Blackwell had been given the ability to communicate with them. Blackwell had been given the ability to guide them. Blackwell had been given the ability to direct them toward a specific purpose. That purpose, according to Chen, was to protect the canyon from exploitation, to prevent the extraction of resources from the earth, to prevent the desecration of sacred sites, to maintain the balance between the physical world and the spiritual world. In other words, the creatures were not evil. The creatures were protectors. But Chen also theorized something else. She theorized that the creatures were becoming more selective in their attacks. She theorized that the creatures were learning to distinguish between those who meant harm and those who meant no harm. She theorized that the creatures were evolving, developing, becoming more intelligent and more purposeful. And Chen theorized that the creatures were beginning to communicate with humans, that the creatures were beginning to try to convey a message, that the creatures were beginning to try to teach humans about the importance of protecting the land. In 2015, a hiker named James Mitchell was exploring Hell Canyon during the day when the creatures were dormant. Mitchell was a nature enthusiast, a man who loved the wilderness and respected the land. He was not there to exploit the canyon or extract resources. He was simply there to appreciate the natural beauty of the place. As Mitchell was exploring, he discovered something remarkable. He discovered a cave hidden deep within the canyon. And inside the cave, he discovered something that would change everything. He discovered a skeleton that appeared to be over a century old. A skeleton that was wearing the tattered remains of 19th century clothing. A skeleton that was surrounded by journals and documents. Mitchell carefully removed the skeleton and the documents from the cave. He brought them to the nearest town and reported his discovery to the authorities. The skeleton was identified as Dr. Edward Blackwell. The journals were Blackwell's personal journals, documenting his transformation, his merger with the creatures, his evolution into something other than human. According to Blackwell's final journals, which were written over a period of decades, Blackwell had not been killed by the creatures. Blackwell had been transformed by them. Blackwell had been given the ability to exist in both the physical world and the spiritual world. Blackwell had been given the ability to communicate with them and guide them. Blackwell had been spent over a century protecting Hell Canyon. He had spent over a century guiding the creatures. He had spent over a century preventing the desecration of the land. But Blackwell's final journal entry, written in 1956, suggested that his time was coming to an end. Blackwell wrote, "I am fading. My body is failing. My consciousness is becoming less distinct. Soon I will be gone completely, but the creatures will remain.
The creatures will continue to protect the canyon. The creatures will continue their work long after I am gone." And then the journals went silent. According to the skeleton's condition, Dr. Edward Blackwell had died sometime in the 1960s. His body had remained in the cave for over 50 years. But the creatures continued their work. The incidents in Hell Canyon have continued into the modern era. The creatures still appear at night. The creatures still protect the canyon from those who would exploit it. The creatures still hunt those who are actively desecrating the land. But the creatures have become less violent, less aggressive. The creatures seem to have learned that they can protect the canyon without killing. The creatures seem to have learned that they can simply drive people away. The creatures seem to have learned that they can communicate their message without resorting to violence. And the creatures continue to be guided by something. Some say it's the spirit of Dr. Edward Blackwell, still guiding them from beyond the grave. Some say it's a new consciousness that has emerged from the merger of human and creature. Some say it's the ancient spirits that were bound to the canyon centuries ago, finally finding a voice through the creatures. Whatever the truth, Hell Canyon remains a place of mystery and power, a place where the ancient and the modern collide, a place where the dead refuse to rest, a place where the iron hooves still echo through the night.
Epilogue. The mystery endures. The story of the iron hooves of Hell Canyon raises questions that we may never be able to answer. Are the creatures truly demonic? Are they guardians? Are they something that exists between the physical world and the spiritual world? Are they the manifestation of ancient spirits? Or are they something far more complex? Something that defies our understanding of reality itself? What we do know is that Hell Canyon remains one of the most mysterious and dangerous places in the American Southwest. What we do know is that people continue to report sightings of the creatures. What we do know is that the legend has endured for over a century and a half. And what we also know is that people continue to hear them. On certain nights, when the moon is full or nearly full, travelers report hearing the sound of hooves echoing through Hell Canyon. Hooves that move at an impossible speed. Hooves that strike the stone ground with a sound like thunder. Hooves that announce death to those who hear them. If you ever find yourself near Hell Canyon on a night when the moon is full, I would offer you one piece of advice. Stay away. Don't venture into the canyon. Don't try to explore it. Don't try to understand it. Because Hell Canyon is a place where the normal rules of nature do not apply. Hell Canyon is a place where the ancient and the modern collide. Hell Canyon is a place where the dead refuse to rest. And somewhere in that canyon, on certain nights, you can still hear them. You can still hear the iron hooves. You can still hear the echoes of demonic horses. You can still hear the sound of a force that exists to protect the land and punish those who would destroy it. This has been Mysteries of the Old West. Thank you for joining us as we explored the darkness of America's frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation into the paranormal mysteries of the Old West. Until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, and remember, some places are better left unexplored. Some mysteries are better left unsolved.
But in Hell Canyon, on certain nights, the iron hooves are still echoing, and they are still hunting.